Hey guys, in today's video we're going to be installing an aftermarket temp gauge, because in typical XJ fashion mine is absolutely cactus. Pretty much as soon as you start the car it runs straight to hot immediately, and when I mean it runs to hot, it runs straight off the gauge. All within about 30 seconds of it starting, all the fans are engaged and I've put my hand on the motor. There's no real heat in there that you'd consider a concern. None of the radiator pipes are perished and they don't get real hot. So it's definitely not getting to the heat that it's saying it is, and especially not in about 30 seconds after starting the vehicle. I've inspected the temp sensor that's responsible for sending the signal to the gauge, and it's not real fantastic, so we're going to rip it out and put an aftermarket one in. I did consider just replacing the one that was already in it and continuing to use the factory gauge, but I've been told they're pretty vague anyway. So I thought I'd just install a cheap aftermarket one, and if I like that one then I'm going to buy a better one, preferably something more digital and a little bit more precise, but this should do the job for the time being. And with that being said, let's crack into it. Now the wiring harness that came with the gauge is rather small, so I thought I'd save myself a little bit of hassle here and start to solder on some wires. Now I'm not an electrician at all, and I'm sure anyone that is going to know that just by looking. In fact, I think I might have used a soldering iron maybe once or twice, but never anything big. So I thought, that's part of the fun, I'm going to try and teach myself as I go, and I didn't have too much trouble. I don't think. Everything seemed to stick pretty well and came out fairly strong. I'm sure someone's going to tell me there's an easier and a better way to do it than the way I've done it, or they're going to grill me about the different coloured wires. Now I did try to get all the same coloured wires, but unfortunately they didn't have all of them in stock, so I had to just get what I could, and it's only a temporary install as I'm pulling it out and putting another gauge in somewhere down the line, so it's only me that's going to really have to deal with it. I gave it a good yank here just to make sure it wasn't going to come apart. Nothing too bad, I wasn't going to stretch the wires, but I didn't want it just falling apart. And then of course, good old heat shrink. And then I just pretty much repeated the process for all the other wires. You don't really need to see all of that though, because you've already seen me do it once and now twice here. No point showing you the fourth time. By this stage I'd got a lighter, so the heat shrink was a little more easy. After spending more time than I'd like to admit, I finally realised you've got to pull off the little adjuster lever here before you can actually pull the steering column cover off, and then you can pull the faceplate out. It's amazing what happens when you actually know what you're doing. The reason I'm pulling all this off is because I want to be able to get to the cigarette lighter, because I want to piggyback off of the power that comes to that. That'll serve my purpose really well. That's assuming it works. And now I'm going to join it. I'm just going to cut straight through them, rejoin them with a joiner and feed the gauge wire into the back of it. Try to get a pretty good squeeze on them here. Some crimpers and some actual wire strippers here would have made the job a lot easier, but working with what I had. Of course we're going to use some heat shrink because I have an unhealthy amount of it, and I like to make sure that anything that has power through it isn't bouncing around and touching bare metal within my car. I've got enough problems to worry about. Hopefully for your sake, if you use heat shrink you get a better lighter than I do. I don't have lighters because I don't actually smoke, so I don't really have a reason to have a lighter, so I just pinch everybody else's when I need it. But I should probably invest in one, because the one I was using here was absolutely woeful and it made the job take way longer than it needed to. As you can see, there's a few little splits here that formed when I grabbed it with a pair of pliers. and I'm not really happy with that, so just to be extra safe I decided to run a bit of tape around it, which probably wouldn't have hurt, but can't be too safe. And now it's time to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. This is the little sender that I was talking about. Look at where it is and look how loose it is. As you can see, it's quite difficult to get to. Whoever placed this here was not thinking of people who had to get it back out. And that's pretty much the state of it. It's not really that good. And there's our nice new shiny new one. Much better. Fed the wiring through the factory wiring hole in the firewall, just so I could use the same little plug that it's got, because I haven't got any at the moment. But there's plenty of spare room. And as for the earth wire, I just pulled one of the bolts out of the little factory brackets that weren't in there all that good, so it was just, well, I checked them I guess, and I used that to earth out the earth wire. And now it's time to check it out. The gauge got to 70 here, and that was after driving it. And I've been using it for quite a bit since I recorded this video, and the hottest it's ever got is 86 when moving. It usually sits at about 80 though, and 90 if you're sitting for a good bit. Which, I don't know, it seems a little warm for me, but a couple of the other XJ dudes that I've talked to said that's pretty normal. So I don't know, we'll have to go with it and see what happens. And coming up in the next episode, the XJ gets the chop as we test out a set of bolt-on flares, cheap ones brought off of eBay.